The Taliban rocket screamed past Captain Maya Rodriguez's UH-60 Black Hawk, so close she could feel the heat through the cockpit glass. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, pulling the helicopter into a sharp banking turn that pressed her deep into her seat. Below, the Afghan valley stretched out in browns and grays, dotted with the muzzle flashes of enemy fire. "Viper 7, you are not cleared for that approach." Major Davidson's voice crackled through her headset, tight with anger. "Return to base immediately." Maya's jaw clenched as she watched the pinned-down squad of Marines through her chin bubble window. They were trapped behind a collapsed stone wall, enemy fire raining down from the ridgeline above. The designated landing zone was a kill box anyone. Trying to extract them the approved way would be committing suicide. Negative control. I have visual on wounded personnel. Beginning emergency extraction. She dropped the Black Hawk into the valley like a falling stone, using the terrain to mask their approach. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, gripped his armrest but didn't protest. He'd flown with Maya long enough to trust her instincts. Even when they terrified him, the helicopter skimmed the valley floor at 60 feet, weaving between rocky outcrops as bullets sparked off the armored hull. Maya's eyes locked onto a narrow ledge barely wide enough for her rotor diameter, landing spot that existed only in the split-second gaps between possible and impossible. "You're insane," Jake breathed, but his hands were already moving to a sister approached. Maya smiled grimly. "That's what they keep telling me." The Black Hawk touched down with surgical precision on the impossible ledge. Before the wheels fully settled, the crew chief was already out, helping wounded Marines scramble. Aboard. Maya kept the engine spooled up, her finger hovering over the collective, ready to lift off the instant the RPG impact threw her forward against her restraints. Alarms screamed through the cockpit as the tail rotor disintegrated in a shower of metal fragments. The helicopter lurched sideways, the main rotor striking rock. "Mayday, mayday. Viper 7 is going down." The world spun in a chaos of dust, screaming metal, and gravity taking its inevitable toll. Maya's head pounded with the rhythm of rotor blades that were no longer turning. She hung sideways in her harness, the acrid smell of burning hydraulic fluid filling her nostrils. Through the cracked windscreen, she could see Jake slumped unconscious in the co-pilot seat, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. "Jake!" Her voice came out as a croak. She fumbled with her harness release, wincing as movement sent lightning bolts of pain through her left shoulder. "Jake, wake up!" The sound of approaching boots on gravel made her freeze. American voices, thank God. The Marines they'd been extracting had survived the crash and were forming a defensive perimeter around the downed aircraft. "Staff." Sergeant Marcus Chun appeared at her window, his face grim behind his tactical goggles. "Captain, we need to move. That crash site is going to draw every insurgent in the valley." Maya nodded, forcing herself to focus despite the concussion symptoms. She'd worry about her shoulder later. Right now, she had people depending on her. "How many wounded?" 3 critical, 2 walking wounded. "Your crew chief took shrapnel to the leg, but he's mobile." Chun's voice carried the weight of command, even though she outranked him. In this moment, he was the one keeping them all alive. She managed to unbuckle her harness and drop to what had been the side wall of the cockpit. Every movement was agony, but she'd felt worse. The time she'd crashed a training helicopter in a thunderstorm had been worse. This was just another Tuesday in Afghanistan. Jake stirred as she checked his pulse. His eyes opened, unfocused but alert enough to matter. "What's our status?" "Alive," Maya said simply. "Let's keep it that way." The extraction from the cockpit took precious minutes they didn't have. By the time Maya stood on solid ground, her legs shaky but functional, the Taliban were already repositioning. The distinctive crack of a K-47 fire echoed off the valley walls. Growing closer, Chun had organized the survivors with military efficiency. The 3 critical casualties were arranged in the shadow of the helicopter's twisted fuselage, while the walking wounded took positions in a defensive circle. Maya counted heads 14 people total, including herself and Jake. 14 people whose lives now depended on her ability to think clearly through a concussion and what felt like a dislocated shoulder. Radio status? She asked Chun. Handheld. Only. The bird's comm system is fried. He held up a PRC-152 radio, its antenna bent but intact. Range is limited in these mountains. Maya took the radio, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. The crash site was in a box canyon with steep walls on 3 sides, defensible in the short term, but ultimately a trap if help didn't arrive soon. The Taliban knew this terrain better than they did, and reinforcements would be coming. Angel Base. Angel Base. This is Viper 7 actual. She kept her voice steady, professional. We have a downed aircraft with 14 souls on board. Request immediate extraction and close air support. Static answered her. She tried again, adjusting frequencies, but the mountains swallowed her words. They were on their own. Jake appeared at her elbow, moving carefully but under his own power. The blood on his face had dried, but his eyes were clearer now. How bad is it? Could be worse. Maya glanced around their makeshift defensive position. Could be better. The first probing attacks came an hour after the crash. Single shots from hidden positions, testing their response and mapping their defensive capabilities. Maya recognized. The tactics. The Taliban weren't in a hurry. They knew the Americans were trapped. And they had time to do this right. They're going to wait for dark, Chun observed, echoing her thoughts. Hit us when we can't see them coming. Maya nodded, her mind already working through options. The defensive position was strong, but limited. They had ammunition for maybe 2 serious firefights, medical supplies for basic trauma care, and enough. Water for half a day in the Afghan heat. Without resupply or extraction, they'd be overrun by dawn. Tell me about the terrain, she said to Chun. You've been patrolling this area longer than I've been flying over it. Chun pulled out a dog-eared map, spreading it on a flat rock. This valley runs north-south for about 3 clicks. Our crash site is here. He pointed to a narrow section between steep ridgelines. There's a village about 2 clicks south, but it's been abandoned for months. To the north, the valley opens up into the main river system. Exit routes? That's the problem, Captain. The walls are too steep for the wounded to climb, and the only way out is through the village or back the way we came. Chun's finger traced the valley floor. Both routes will be covered by Taliban positions by now. Maya studied the map, her pilot's eye analyzing angles and distances. The crash site was tactically sound for defense, but strategically hopeless for escape. Unless ... double quote about here. She pointed to a narrow draw that branched off from the main valley. Could a helicopter fit through there? Chun squinted at the map. Maybe, it's tight, but ... He trailed off, understanding dawning in his eyes. Captain, even if you could raise someone on the radio, no pilot is going to attempt an extraction through that canyon. It's suicide. Maya smiled for the first time since the crash. Good thing I know some crazy pilots. The radio finally crackled to life as the sun reached its zenith, turning the valley floor into a furnace. Maya had been trying different frequencies for 3 hours, adjusting for atmospheric conditions and the mountain terrain that swallowed radio waves like a hungry beast. Viper 7, this is Angel Base. We have you weak and intermittent. Maya keyed the handset, relief flooding through her. Angel Base, Viper 7 actual. We are down with 14 souls. Request immediate extraction and CAS. The pause that followed stretched long enough that she thought they'd lost the connection. When Major Davidson's voice came through, it carried the weight of barely controlled fury. Captain Rodriguez, you are to maintain your position and await ground-based extraction. That is a direct order. Maya closed her eyes, knowing what was coming. Her reputation had preceded her again. Angel Base, ground extraction is not feasible. We need air support and immediate. Negative, Viper 7. You are grounded, Captain. Your reckless actions have resulted in the loss of a multi-million-dollar aircraft and endangered the lives of Marines under your protection. The radio went silent. Around her, the Marines exchanged glances, some sympathetic, others calculating. They all knew the score now. Their pilot was in trouble with command, and that might affect their chances of getting home alive. Jake took the radio from her hands. Let me try. Sometimes a male voice gets through where, no. Maya's voice was quiet but firm. This isn't about gender, Jake. This is about Kandahar. 6 months earlier, Maya had disobeyed direct orders to abandon a reconnaissance team that had been cut off by a Taliban ambush. The approved extraction point was under heavy fire, so she'd improvised landing her helicopter on the roof of a partially collapsed building while rockets exploded around them. She'd saved 8 men that day, but the investigation that followed had nearly ended her career. Reckless endangerment of aircraft and personnel had been the official finding. The fact that everyone came home alive hadn't mattered to the review board. What mattered was that she'd broken protocol, violated orders, and set what they called a dangerous precedent for future operations. The Marines around her didn't know the details, but they could read between the lines. Their pilot was a cowboy, someone who took risks that scared her own command. In combat, that could be either a blessing or a curse. Sergeant Chun approached, his expression carefully neutral. Captain, what's our real situation here? Maya appreciated his directness. No sugarcoating, no false optimism, just a professional soldier asking for professional assessment. She owed him the truth. Command thinks I'm too aggressive. They're worried I'll get people killed trying to be a hero. She gestured toward the radio. They'd rather wait for a ground convoy than risk another helicopter on what they see as a recovery operation led by someone with questionable judgment. What do you think? Maya looked around the defensive perimeter. 3 Marines were unconscious, their breathing shallow from blood loss and trauma. The walking wounded were already showing signs of dehydration and fatigue. By nightfall, they'd be facing a coordinated attack from an enemy that knew every rock and hiding place in these mountains. I think command is looking at this from an air-conditioned briefing room where the biggest risk is spilling coffee on their paperwork. Her voice hardened. I think a ground convoy will take 6 hours minimum to reach us, and we'll all be dead in 3. Chun nodded slowly. So what's the plan, Captain? Before she could answer, the crack of rifle fire echoed off the canyon walls. Not the probing shots from before. This was sustained fire from multiple positions. The Taliban had finished their reconnaissance and were beginning their assault. Contact left. One of the Marines shouted, dropping behind the shelter of a boulder. I count at least 6 shooters on the ridgeline. Maya grabbed her M4 carbine, the standard weapon carried by aircrews, and moved to a firing position. The rifle felt awkward in her hands after months of flying, but muscle memory took over. She'd qualified expert marksman every year since flight school, understanding that pilots sometimes had to fight their way out of bad situations. The firefight lasted 20 minutes. When it ended, the Taliban melted back into the rocks like smoke, leaving behind only the echo of gunshots and the smell of cordite. They'd been testing the American response, learning the defensive positions and capabilities. Maya checked her watch. 1,347 hours. The sun would set in 4 hours, and the real attack would come with darkness. Casualties? She called out. Gomez took a ricochet off his helmet, Chun reported. Shook him up, but he's still functional. No other hits. They'd been lucky. The next attack would be more coordinated, more aggressive. Maya keyed the radio again, hoping for a miracle. Angel Base, Viper 7. We are under enemy fire and require immediate support. Estimate company strength Taliban forces converging. On our position. This time, a different voice answered, Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the base commander. Maya had flown missions for Mitchell before. The colonel was old-school Army, someone who understood that combat rarely followed the textbook. Viper. 7. I'm looking at your position on satellite imagery. That's a very bad place to be. Yes, ma'am. That's why we need extraction ASAP. Another pause, shorter this time. Captain Rodriguez, I'm going to be direct with you. Your service record shows a pattern of insubordination and reckless decision-making. Why should I risk more aircraft and personnel on what appears to be the result of another unauthorized deviation from approved procedures? The question hung in the air like smoke from the recent gunfight. Maya looked around at the Marines who were depending on her, wounded men who'd followed orders and ended up trapped because of her decision to attempt an impossible extraction. She keyed the radio, her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. Because 14 Americans are going to die tonight if you don't, Colonel. And because sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the wrong rules. The silence from Angel Base stretched for nearly 10 minutes before Colonel Mitchell's voice returned, crackling through the static with unmistakable authority. Viper 7, stand by for traffic. Maya waited, watching Jake tend to one of the wounded Marines, a kid who couldn't be more than 19, his face pale with shock and blood loss. The boy's name tape read Patterson, and according to his dog tags, he was from Ohio, probably had a girlfriend back home, maybe parents who still tucked care packages full of cookies and worry. Viper 7, we're scrambling Apache gunships for close air support, ETA 30 mics. Ground convoy is being organized but won't reach your position until after sunset. Mitchell's voice carried the weight of command decisions that kept people awake at night. You are to maintain defensive positions and avoid unnecessary risks. Acknowledge. Maya closed her eyes, understanding the subtext. The Apaches would provide covering fire, but extraction was still off the table. Command wanted her to hunker down and wait for the cavalry, a reasonable plan if you ignored the tactical reality of their situation. Angel Base, request permission to attempt movement to more defensible position. Negative, Viper 7. You are to hold current position. Ground teams need a fixed reference point for coordination. Jake caught her eye and shook his head slightly. He'd been listening to the radio traffic, reading between the lines with the intuition that came from 5 years of flying together. Command didn't trust Maya's judgment, and that lack of trust was going to get them all killed. Chun approached with his map, spreading it out on the ground between them. Captain, I've been thinking about defensive positions. This crash site is good for the short term, but we're sitting ducks if they bring mortar or RPGs into play. Maya studied the terrain features around their position. The helicopter wreckage provided some cover, but it was also a beacon for enemy fire, a twisted monument to American technology brought low by a lucky shot. The surrounding rocks offered concealment, but little protection from indirect fire. Show me alternatives. Chun's finger traced a path along the valley floor. There's a natural bowl about 300 meters north. Better cover, multiple exit routes, and harder for them to surround. He paused, meeting her eyes. But it would mean moving the wounded, and command specifically ordered us to hold position. The radio crackled again. Viper 7, be advised that your situation is being monitored at division level. Any movement from your current position must be pre-approved by this headquarters. Maya stared at the handset, feeling the weight of military bureaucracy pressing down like the Afghan sun. Somewhere in an air-conditioned command center, officers who hadn't seen combat in years were making decisions about life and death, based on satellite images and protocol manuals, she thought. About Patterson, the wounded Marine from Ohio, about the other casualties who needed medical attention that wouldn't arrive for hours. About the Taliban fighters who were even now positioning mortar and machine guns for the final assault. "Jake," she said quietly, "what would you do?" Her co-pilot looked up from checking ammunition magazines. They'd flown together through 2 deployments, shared the peculiar intimacy that came from trusting someone with your life on a daily basis. He knew her better than her ex-husband had, understood her decision-making process in ways that command never would. "Honestly, I'd probably follow orders and hope for the best." He paused, his eyes finding hers. "But I'm not the one wearing captain's bars. That's why they pay you more than me." Maya smiled despite the situation. Jake's gentle sarcasm had gotten them through some dark moments, the time they'd been shot down near Fallujah, the mission where they'd lost 3 crew members to an IED, the endless parade of casualties that defined their war. "Chun," she called to the Marine sergeant. "How long to move the wounded to that defensive position you identified?" 20 minutes if we're careful, maybe 15 if we push it." Chun glanced toward the ridgeline where Taliban fighters were certainly watching, but we'd be exposed during the movement. They could cut us apart. Maya checked her watch, 14:25 hours. The Apache gunships would arrive around 1500, providing a window of opportunity when enemy movement would be suppressed. The ground convoy wouldn't reach them until well after dark, assuming it could navigate the mountain roads without being ambushed. The radio squawked, "Viper 7, this is Thunder 1-1. We have you on station in 15 mics. Sit tight and keep your heads down." The Apache pilot's voice carried the confidence of someone flying an armored gunship, bristling with Hellfire missiles and 30mm cannon. Easy to be confident when you weren't stuck on the ground with enemy fighters closing in from 3 directions. Maya made her decision with the cold calculation that had kept her alive through 4 combat deployments. Command could court-martial her later, assuming she lived long enough for a court-martial to matter. "Chun, start prepping the wounded for movement." "Jake, I need you to jury-rig some kind of communication relay so we can maintain contact with the Apaches." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Maya, command specifically ordered. Command is going to get us all killed." Her voice carried the authority that came from wearing pilot wings and captain's bars. But underneath was something else, the weight of responsibility for 14 lives that couldn't be delegated to a committee in an air-conditioned room. Chun was already moving, organizing his Marines with the efficiency of someone who understood that speed and violence of action were sometimes the only tools that mattered. The wounded were secured on improvised stretchers while the walking wounded checked weapons and ammunition. The radio crackled with increasing urgency. "Viper 7, this is Angel Base. We show movement at your position. Confirm your status, Maya." Keyed the handset, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Angel Base, Viper 7. We are moving to improve defensive positions. Will maintain radio contact." "Negative, Viper 7. You are ordered to remain in place. Acknowledge." Maya turned off the radio. Jake stared at her. "Did you just—" "Yes." She shouldered her rifle, checking the magazine and chamber with movements that had become automatic after years of combat flying. Sometimes you have to choose between following orders and bringing people home. Today, I'm choosing to bring people home. The movement began as the sound of Apache rotors echoed off the canyon walls. The movement began as the sound of Apache Apache rotors echoed off the canyon walls. H-64 Apache helicopters appeared over the ridgeline like mechanical angels of death, their tandem rotors beating the thin mountain air with mechanical precision. Maya felt a familiar surge of professional admiration. Apache pilots were artists in their own right. Masters of controlled violence who could thread a Hellfire missile through a window at 3 kilometers. "Thunder 1-1 Viper 7, she transmitted on the aviation frequency. "We have 14 souls moving to improved positions. Request suppressive fires on grid. 42 SQB 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. The Apache pilot's response was immediate and professional. Viper 7, Thunder 1-1. I copy 14 souls relocating. Beginning gun runs now. Keep your people low and marked with IR strobes. The first burst of 30mm cannon fire shredded the ridgeline where Taliban fighters had been positioning themselves. The sound was distinctive, a mechanical buzzsaw that could cut through rock and flesh with equal efficiency. Secondary explosions bloomed among the enemy positions as ammunition and equipment detonated. Maya led the movement, her shoulders screaming with every step but her mind focused on the tactical situation. Chun had organized the Marines into a traveling formation that balanced security with the need to move wounded personnel quickly across open ground. The 3 critical casualties were carried on improvised stretchers, while the walking wounded provided covering fire. Jake brought up the rear, the handheld radio pressed to his ear as he maintained communication with both the Apaches and Angel. Base. Maya could hear fragments of increasingly angry transmissions from command, but she blocked out the noise. Court-martial proceedings could wait right now. The only thing that mattered was reaching the defensive position before the enemy recovered from the Apache strikes. Contact right. One of the Marines shouted, dropping to a knee and returning. Fire toward muzzle flashes among the rocks. The Taliban had recovered faster than expected. Infiltrating closer to the crash site during the confusion of the airstrikes, Maya dropped beside a boulder, her M4 carbine tracking toward the enemy positions. She could see at least 3 fighters moving through the rocks, their AK-47s spitting fire toward the American formation. Her rifle bucked against her shoulder as she fired controlled pairs, trying to suppress the enemy advance rather than score. Kills. Thunder 1-1 were taking fire from the east wall, she transmitted. Grid 42 SQB 1245,680. Approximately 3 personnel. The Apache's response was immediate and devastating. A Hellfire missile streaked from its rail-mounted launcher, impacting the rock face in an explosion of dust and shrapnel. The enemy fire ceased abruptly. Splash, the Apache pilot reported with professional satisfaction. I show no further movement in that area. The movement resumed, covering the remaining distance to Chun's identified defensive position in bounds. Maya's legs felt like rubber by the time they reached the natural bola, depression in the valley floor surrounded by house-sized boulders that provided both concealment and protection from direct fire. Defensive positions. Chun called out, his Marines responding with the automatic efficiency of people who had trained for this moment. The wounded were moved to the center of the position while the able-bodied took firing positions among the rocks. Maya collapsed behind a boulder, her breathing ragged and her shoulder on fire. The movement had been successful, but it had also revealed the severity of their tactical situation. The Taliban weren't just a handful of fighters with small arms. This was an organized force with mortar, RPGs, and the patience to conduct a deliberate assault. Jake slumped beside her, the radio in his hand crackling with traffic from increasingly agitated controllers. Command is not happy, he said with typical understatement. Colonel Mitchell wants to speak with you immediately. Maya accepted the radio, steeling herself for what was coming. Angel Base, Viper 7 Actual, Captain Rodriguez. Mitchell's voice could have frozen the Afghan desert. You were given direct orders to maintain your position. Explain your actions. Maya looked around at the Marines who had trusted her judgment, at the wounded men who needed medical attention that was still hours away. She thought about Patterson from Ohio, whose pulse was growing weaker despite Jake's first aid efforts. Ma'am, the previous position was untenable. We were sitting ducks waiting for indirect fire. She kept her voice professional despite the anger building in her chest. Current position offers better protection and multiple egress routes. That was not your decision to make, Captain. You are a pilot, not a ground commander. The criticism stung because it contained an element of truth. Maya's specialty was aviation, not infantry tactics. But she was also the senior officer on the ground, responsible for 14 lives that couldn't be saved by following inappropriate orders from people who weren't sharing the danger. Ma'am, respectfully, I'm the one here. I can see what command cannot. What I can see, Captain, is a pattern of insubordination that has now resulted in the loss of a helicopter and endangered the lives of Marines under your protection. Mitchell's voice carried the weight of someone who had made similar decisions and lived with the consequences. You are relieved of command. Sergeant Chun will assume tactical control until ground forces arrive. The radio went silent. Around her, the Marines exchanged glances, some sympathetic, others calculating their chances under new leadership. Maya felt the weight of command lift from her shoulders, replaced by something heavier, the knowledge that she'd pushed too hard too far and finally broken the chain of trust that held military units together. Chun approached, his expression carefully neutral. Captain, I appreciate what you've done for us, but I need to know, are you going to keep following orders, or are you going to keep improvising? It was a fair question from a professional soldier who understood that unit cohesion was more important than individual heroics. Maya handed him the radio, accepting the transfer of authority with as much grace as she could manage. Your show now, Sergeant. I'll follow your lead. Chun nodded, then moved away to coordinate with the Apache pilots who were still providing overwatch. Maya found herself alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that her military career was over. Jake settled beside her, checking his own rifle with the methodical care of someone who understood that their situation was far from resolved. You know they're going to crucify you for this. Maya nodded, watching the sun sink lower toward the canyon rim. Probably. But Patterson and the others will be alive to testify at my court-martial, assuming we all make it home. Yeah, Maya said quietly, chambering around in her M4, assuming we all make it home. The Taliban attack began with the sound of mortar rounds leaving their tubes somewhere in the gathering darkness. The first mortar round impacted 50 meters short of their position, sending a fountain of rock and dust into the air. Maya counted the seconds between the distant pop of the tube firing and the explosion. Basic mathematics that told her the enemy was approximately 800 meters away, close enough to walk rounds onto target with deadly accuracy. Incoming! Chun shouted, though everyone had already taken cover. The second round landed closer, fragments whining off the boulders that sheltered them. Maya pressed herself against the rock, feeling the concussion through the stone. Thunder 1-1 Viper 7, Chun transmitted, his voice steady despite the circumstances. We're taking indirect fire. Can you locate the mortar position? The Apache pilot's response carried frustration. Negative, Viper 7. I'm not seeing muzzle flashes in this light. Need you to spot for me. Maya closed her eyes, drawing on 4 deployments of combat experience to read the tactical situation. The Taliban were using classic infantry tactics spin. The Americans down with indirect fire while assault teams moved into position for the final attack. Standard procedure called for counter-battery fire, but the Apaches couldn't engage targets they couldn't see. The third mortar round landed inside their perimeter, the explosion deafening in the confined space. Maya felt the shock wave through her chest, her ears ringing despite the phone plug she'd inserted. Dust and debris rained down as someone screamed, whether from pain or terror, she couldn't tell. Casualty. Jake called out, his voice cutting through the ringing in her ears. I need medical supplies. Maya crawled toward the sound of his voice, keeping low as another mortar round impacted nearby. She found Jake working on one of the walking wounded, a Marine named Rodriguez whose left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood pooled beneath him, dark in the fading light. How bad? She asked, already knowing the answer from Jake's expression. Arterial bleeding. I can slow it down, but he needs a surgeon. Jake's hands worked with practiced efficiency, applying pressure dressings and improvised tourniquets. "He's got maybe an hour." Maya looked at Rodriguez, another kid from somewhere in America, someone's son who had volunteered to serve in a war most people back home preferred to forget. His face was pale with shock, but his eyes were alert, aware of what was happening to him. "Hey, Rodriguez," she said, moving closer so he could hear her over the incoming rounds. "What's your first name?" "Miguel," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "My name's Miguel." "Okay, Miguel. I need you to stay with us, understand? We're going to get you out of here." Miguel nodded weakly, but Maya could see the life draining out of his eyes with every heartbeat that pumped blood through Jake's makeshift bandages. Without immediate surgical intervention, he would die in this godforsaken valley, another casualty of a war that seemed to have no clear purpose or achievable end. Chun appeared at her elbow, his face grim in the failing light. "Captain, we've got movement on 3 sides. They're closing in for the assault." Maya accepted a pair of night vision goggles, the world suddenly shifting to green-tinted clarity. She could see Taliban fighters moving through the rocks, using the cover of darkness and terrain to close the distance. At least 20 men, possibly more, armed with AK-47s, RPGs, and the fanatical determination of people fighting on their home ground. "How much ammunition do we have?" she asked. "Enough for maybe 10 minutes of sustained fire." Chun's assessment was brutally honest. "After that, we're down to harsh language and good intentions." Maya did the math. 20-plus attackers against 14 Americans, half of whom were wounded. Even with Apache support, the numbers didn't add up. They needed extraction or reinforcement, and both were hours away. The radio crackled with transmission. "From Angel Base, Viper 7, Thunder 1 is reporting bingo fuel. They're returning to base for refuel and rearm." Maya felt her stomach drop. The Apaches had been their ace in the hole, the decisive advantage that kept the Taliban at bay. Without close air support, they were facing a conventional infantry assault with inadequate numbers and limited ammunition. "Angel Base, request immediate replacement air support," Chun transmitted. "Stand by, Viper 7. The pause stretched long enough that Maya knew the answer before it came. "Viper 7, negative on immediate air support. Next available CAS is 30 minutes out, 30 minutes. Maya looked around their defensive perimeter, calculating angles of fire and fields of observation. Without the psychological effect of attack helicopters, the Taliban would press their assault with renewed aggression. 30 minutes was a lifetime in infantry combat, long enough for everyone in the perimeter to die twice over. Maya. Jake's voice was quiet, meant only for her ears. "I know command relieved you, but Chun's never been in a situation like this. These Marines are looking for leadership." Maya glanced toward the sergeant, who was checking defensive positions with methodical competence. Chun was a good soldier, but he was also following doctrine designed for conventional warfare. This situation called for something else: improvisation, risk-taking, and the kind of aggressive decision-making that had already ended her military career. "I'm not in command anymore, Jake. That was made very clear. Officially, no. But these Marines have been listening to your radio calls, watching how you handle pressure." Jake paused as another mortar round impacted nearby. "They know you're the one who got them this far alive." The assault began with a sustained burst of automatic weapons fire from 3 directions simultaneously. Maya dropped to a firing position, her M4 carbine tracking toward muzzle flashes in the darkness. The Taliban were using fire and movement. Tactics: one group laying down suppressive fire while another advanced to new positions. "Contact left," Chun shouted, his rifle barking as he engaged targets among the rocks. "At least 6 shooters." Maya found her target, a fighter silhouetted against the night sky as he moved between boulders. Her rifle recoiled against her shoulder as she fired, the man dropping immediately. Training and muscle memory took over, her hands working the way rifle with mechanical precision while her mind calculated angles and distances. The firefight intensified, tracers crisscrossing the darkness like deadly fireworks. Maya could hear Chun shouting orders, trying to coordinate defensive fires while managing ammunition consumption. The Marines responded with professional competence, but she could hear the strain in their voices as they faced an enemy that seemed to materialize from the rocks themselves. RPG, someone screamed, the distinctive whoosh of a rocket-propelled grenade cutting through the gunfire. The warhead detonated against the boulder, protecting Miguel and Jake, showering them with rock fragments and dust. Miguel screamed a sound that cut through Maya like physical pain. Jake was shouting for medical supplies that didn't exist, trying to treat wounds that required surgery, not first aid. Around them, the defensive perimeter was contracting as Taliban fighters pressed closer, their assault gaining momentum. Maya made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. "Chun!" she shouted over the gunfire. "I'm taking a team to flank their mortar position." The sergeant's response was immediate and negative. "Ma'am, you're not in command anymore. We hold this position. That position is killing Miguel." Maya gestured toward the wounded Marine, whose breathing was becoming increasingly labored. "We need to take out those mortar, or we're all dead." Chun's jaw clenched, torn between military protocol and tactical reality. The mortar fire was walking closer with each round, adjusting based on observation of previous impacts. Eventually, probably within the next 10 minutes, they would achieve a direct hit on the defensive position. "I'll take Jake and 2 volunteers," Maya continued, already moving toward her equipment. "Circle around to the north while you keep them busy here. 10 minutes, in and out." "That's suicide, Captain." Chun's voice carried the authority of someone who had assumed tactical command, but underneath was uncertainty. He was following the book, but the book wasn't written for this situation. Jake appeared at Maya's shoulder, checking his rifle and ammunition. "I'm in." 2 of the Marines, Corporals Thompson and Davies, moved to join them without being asked. Both were young, probably early 20s, but their eyes held the steady calm of people who had seen combat before. They understood that sometimes the only way out was through. "Ma'am," Thompson said quietly, "Chun's right about it being suicide. But staying here is suicide too, just slower." Maya nodded, appreciating the brutal honesty. She pulled out her map using a red-filtered flashlight to study the terrain features around their position. The mortar team was approximately 800 meters north, probably positioned in a natural depression that provided both concealment and protection from counter-battery fire. "We go up the east wall, move north parallel to the valley floor, then come down behind them." She traced the route with her finger. "It's going to be steep and will be exposed if they have security posted on the high ground." Davies checked his night vision goggles, adjusting the focus for optimal clarity. "What about extraction? How do we get back once we hit them?" It was a good question, the kind that professional soldiers asked, because they understood that completing the mission was meaningless if you didn't survive to report success. Maya studied the map again, looking for covered routes and rally points. "We don't come back the same way. After we take out the mortar, we continue north to this ridgeline." She pointed to a series of peaks that overlooked the main valley. "Higher ground, better defensive positions, and it puts us closer to where the ground convoy will be coming from." Chun listened to the plan with growing disbelief. "Captain, you're talking about abandoning our position and splitting our forces in the middle of an assault. That goes against every principle of defensive operations." "Our position is compromised," Maya replied, shouldering her rifle and checking her equipment one final time. "The mortar have us bracketed, and once the next CS flight arrives, they'll call off this assault and wait for another opportunity. We need to break their initiative now while they're committed to this attack." Another mortar round impacted near their position, close enough that Maya felt rocks pelting her helmet. In the aftermath of the explosion, She could hear Miguel calling for his mother, a heartbreaking sound that cut through all tactical considerations and reminded her why they were here. 10 minutes, she told Chun. If we're not successful, continue with your original plan. Chun nodded reluctantly, understanding that argument was pointless. Maya Rodriguez was going to do what Maya Rodriguez thought was right, regardless of orders or protocol. His job now was to keep the defensive position intact long enough for her plan to either succeed or fail spectacularly. Good luck, Captain. Maya led her small team toward the eastern wall of the canyon, using the cover of ongoing gunfire to mask their movement. The climb was treacherous in the darkness, loose rock shifting under their boots as they worked their way up the steep slope. Behind them, the firefight continued with increasing intensity as Chun's Marines engaged Taliban fighters who were pressing closer to the defensive position. Jake climbed beside her. His breathing labored from exertion and the effects of his head injury. You know this is crazy, right? Yeah, Maya replied, pausing to catch her breath and check their route. But crazy seems to be working for us so far. Thompson and Davies followed without complaint, their youth and physical conditioning making the climb easier despite the heavy equipment they carried. Both Marines understood that their survival depended on maintaining noise discipline and speed. The Taliban would have scouts watching for exactly this kind of flanking movement. The climb took 12 minutes, longer than Maya had hoped, but faster than she had feared. When they finally reached the ridge line, she could see the entire tactical situation spread out below them like a deadly board game. The defensive position was a cluster of muzzle flashes surrounded by advancing Taliban fighters, while the mortar position was a dim glow approximately 600 meters to the north. There, Davies whispered, pointing toward a natural bowl in the rocks where the mortar were hidden. I count at least 4 personnel. Maya studied the target through her night vision goggles. The mortar crew had positioned themselves well protected from direct fire by rock walls, with clear lines of sight to adjust their fires based on observed impacts. Taking them out would require getting close, probably within grenade range. Jake, you and Thompson provide overwatch from here. Davies and I will move in from the north. She checked her rifle one final time, ensuring the safety was off and a round was chambered. When we initiate, put everything you have into that position. The approach took another 8 minutes, working their way down the reverse slope of the ridge and then circling around to approach the mortar position from behind. Maya could hear the Taliban fighters talking in hushed voices, coordinating their fires and adjusting for wind and elevation. Professional soldiers doing their job with competent efficiency. Davies tapped her shoulder and pointed. Through a gap in the rocks, she could see the mortar crew clearly, 4 men working around a Soviet-era 82mm mortar, with ammunition stacked nearby and a radio operator coordinating with the assault teams below. Maya pulled the pin on a fragmentation grenade, counting the seconds as she cooked it off to prevent the enemy from taking cover. 3.2.1. The grenade detonated in the center of the mortar position, the explosion amplified by the confined space and the ammunition stored nearby. Secondary explosions lit up the night as mortar rounds cooked off, creating a fireworks display that could be seen from the main valley. Mortar are down, Maya transmitted on the tactical frequency. All stations, mortar are down. The response from the defensive position was immediate, a sustained burst of celebratory gunfire that lasted until Chun restored fire discipline. Without the threat of indirect fire, the Taliban assault lost its coordination and momentum. Maya could see fighters breaking off their attack, melting back into the darkness from which they had come, but their mission wasn't complete. Miguel still needed medical attention, and the ground convoy was still hours away. Maya looked north toward the ridgeline where Jake and Thompson were providing overwatch, calculating distances and routes to link up with approaching friendly forces. Davies, can you make it back to the main position? The Marine nodded, checking his equipment and ammunition. Yes, ma'am. What about you? Maya looked toward the northern approaches, where helicopter landing zones might be available, if someone was brave enough or crazy enough to attempt a night extraction in hostile territory. She thought about her reputation, her career, and the 14 people whose lives hung in the balance. The radio frequency Maya chose was one she hadn't used in 6 months, the personal channel she'd shared with Captain Alex Chun, no relation to the Marine sergeant, during their previous deployment. Alex flew UH-60 Black Hawks out of Bagram. And more importantly, he owed Maya his life from an incident in Helmand Province that never made it into any official reports. Ghost Rider 6, Ghost Rider 6, this is Viper 7 on TAC 4. Static answered her for nearly 30 seconds before Alex's familiar voice crackled through the darkness. Viper 7, Ghost Rider 6. Maya, is that you? I heard you went down. I'm alive, but I've got 14 souls who need immediate extraction. She kept her voice professional despite the relief at hearing a friendly voice. Can you get airborne? Another pause, longer this time. Alex would be calculating the risk, an unauthorized night extraction in hostile territory, launched without approval from command. The kind of mission that could end careers, even if it saved lives. Maya, command has you listed as Kia. The whole valley is crawling with Taliban, and they've got SS-7 south. Alex's voice carried the strain of someone trying to find a way to say yes, while knowing all the reasons to say no. Even if I wanted to help, I can't get clearance for. I'm not asking for clearance. Maya interrupted, watching the northern ridgeline where Jake and Thompson were holding overwatch. I'm asking for a favor, one pilot to another. The radio went silent. Maya counted heartbeats, listening to the sounds of sporadic gunfire from the valley below as Chin's Marines consolidated their defensive position. Miguel was still alive, but barely Jake's medical skills were buying time that could only be repaid with surgical intervention. What's your position? Alex finally asked. Maya smiled despite everything, recognizing the tone that meant Alex had made his decision. Grid 42 SQB 1255,690 approximately. I can mark with IR strobe when you're inbound. I'm looking at that. Grid on satellite imagery. There's no landing zone, Maya. It's all rocks and vertical terrain. There's a ridgeline running north-south. Narrow, but flat enough for a Black Hawk if the pilot has steady hands. Maya studied the terrain through her night vision goggles, identifying the landing zone that existed only in her imagination and desperate hope. I'm talking about a pinnacle landing on a ridge barely wider than your rotor diameter. Alex's laugh was dry and humorless. You mean the kind of landing that gets pilots killed and passengers turned into hamburger? The kind of landing you perfected in flight school while everyone else was playing it safe. Maya played to his ego, remembering the competitive spirit that had driven Alex to master the most difficult flying techniques. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? We're already dead according to command. Give me 30 minutes to pre-flight and launch, and Maya? Alex's voice carried a note of grim humor. If this gets me court-martialed, I'm blaming everything on you. Fair enough. Viper 7 out. Maya pocketed the radio and began working her way north along the ridgeline toward the improvised landing zone. The terrain was treacherous in the darkness, loose rock, and steep drop-offs that could easily result in a fatal fall. But it was also the only route that offered both concealment from enemy observation and access to a helicopter landing zone. Jake and Thompson were waiting at the designated overwatch position, their rifles trained on the valley below where Taliban fighters were still moving through the darkness. The mortar attack had ended, but the enemy hadn't given up. They were regrouping for another assault, probably timed for just before dawn when fatigue would be at its peak. How's our situation down there? Maya asked Jake, settling into a firing position beside him. Chun's got them organized, but ammunition is running low. Davies made it back safely and reported mission success. Jake adjusted his night vision goggles, scanning for enemy movement. Miguel's still hanging on, but he needs a surgeon in the next hour or two. Maya nodded, checking her watch. 2,130 hours, still 6 hours until dawn, but only 30 minutes. Until Alex arrived with salvation or disaster. The pinnacle landing she described was theoretically possible, but it required perfect weather, optimal conditions, and a pilot willing to risk everything on a maneuver that existed at the very edge of physics and skill. "I've got a bird inbound," she told Jake. "Emergency extraction for the critical casualties." Jake stared at her. "Command authorized extraction?" "Not exactly," Maya smiled grimly. "Let's call it an unauthorized test flight that happened to be in the neighborhood." Thompson overheard the conversation and moved closer, his young face serious in the green glow of night vision equipment. "Ma'am, if command finds out about this, they'll throw the book at everyone involved." "Only if we survive long enough for them to throw books," Maya replied. "Right now, keeping people alive is more important than keeping careers intact." The three of them worked together to prepare the improvised landing zone, using entrenching tools and bare hands to clear loose rocks from a stretch of ridge, barely 40 feet wide. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. The difference between life and death often came down to inches and split-second timing. Maya's radio crackled with Alex's voice. "Viper 7. Ghost Rider 6 is airborne and en route to your location. Ada 15 minutes. Copy, Ghost Rider 6. Be advised landing zone is extremely confined. Recommend approach from the south to avoid enemy observation. Understood. I'll try not to auger in on your improvised helipad." Alex's attempt at humor couldn't quite hide the tension in his voice. Night flying in mountainous terrain was dangerous enough under normal circumstances. Attempting a pinnacle landing in a combat zone while unauthorized and unsupported pushed the envelope well beyond anything covered in training manuals. Maya used the waiting time to coordinate with Chun via radio, arranging for the critical casualties to be moved to a rally point where they could be quickly transferred to the helicopter. The movement would expose the Marines to enemy fire, but it was a calculated risk. Staying in the valley meant certain death for Miguel and the others. "Viper 7, I have you on thermal imaging," Alex transmitted. "That landing zone looks even smaller from up here." Maya could hear the distinctive sound of U-60 rotors echoing off the canyon walls, growing louder as Alex maneuvered his helicopter toward their position. She activated her IR strobe, marking the center of the improvised landing zone with a beacon visible only through night vision equipment. "Ghost Rider 6, you are cleared for landing. Wind is calm, visibility unlimited." What she didn't mention was that the landing zone sloped downward on both sides, creating a knife-edge ridge that offered no margin for error. A few feet too far in any direction would send the helicopter tumbling into the valley below, taking Alex and his crew with it. The Black Hawk materialized out of the darkness like a mechanical ghost, its navigation lights blacked out to avoid enemy detection. Alex was flying by feel and instinct, using thermal imaging and night vision to guide his approach to a landing zone that violated every safety regulation in the flight manual. Maya watched with professional admiration as Alex brought the helicopter into a hover over the ridgeline, his rotor wash kicking up clouds of dust and debris. The aircraft hung suspended in space, its landing gear just inches from touching down on solid ground. "This is going to be tight," Alex transmitted, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "I can hold this hover for maybe 2 minutes before I have to abort." "Copy, 2 minutes." Maya was already moving, leading Jake and Thompson down the ridge toward the rally point where Chun's Marines were waiting with the casualties. Starting movement now. The transfer was conducted with military efficiency, born of desperation. Miguel was loaded first, his stretcher secured in the helicopters. cabin while Jake continued providing medical care. The other critical casualties followed, their unconscious forms carefully positioned to maximize available space. 60 seconds, Alex called out, his voice tight with concentration. The helicopter was dancing on the edge of controlled flight. Its rotors just feet from the rocky walls on either side of the landing zone. Maya helped load the last casualty, then stepped back to allow the aircraft to depart. But Jake grabbed her arm, his eyes wide with something between concern and accusation. "You're not coming? Someone needs to stay and coordinate with the ground convoy." Maya's voice was steady, but inside she felt the weight of another decision. That would probably end badly, get them to medical care. That's what matters. Jake started to protest, but Alex's voice cut through the radio static. 30 seconds. I have to go now. The Black Hawk lifted off in a cloud of dust and rotor wash, climbing quickly to avoid enemy fire from the valley below. Maya watched it disappear into the darkness, carrying Miguel and the others toward medical care that might, if they were lucky, arrive in time to save their lives. Thompson settled beside her, checking his rifle and scanning the darkness for enemy movement. "Ma'am, what's the plan now?" Maya looked back toward the valley where Chun's Marines were still holding their defensive position, waiting for a ground convoy that was hours away. She thought about Command's orders, her ruined career, and the growing certainty that this night was far from over. Now we figure out how to keep the rest of them alive until morning. The Taliban attack resumed an hour after Alex's helicopter disappeared into the darkness, but this time it came from a different direction. Maya realized with growing unease that the enemy had used the temporary lull to reposition, probably moving additional fighters into the area. What had started as a company-sized assault was growing into something larger and more coordinated. "Contact north." Chun's voice crackled through the radio, tight with strain. "I count at least 10 shooters moving through the rocks." Maya and Thompson were still on the ridge line, providing overwatch for the defensive position below. Through her night vision goggles, she could see muzzle flashes erupting from multiple locations around Chun's perimeter, a coordinated assault from 3 directions that spoke of professional planning and superior numbers. Jake's medical supplies helped, but we're still dealing with people who need more than field medicine, Thompson observed, adjusting his rifle scope for a long-range shot. "And ammunition is getting critical down there." Maya keyed her radio. "Chun, what's your ammo status?" "Maybe 10 minutes of sustained fire per man," came the grim response. "After that, we're down to harsh language and fixed bayonets." The math was simple and brutal. Chun had 11 effective fighters remaining, facing an enemy force that seemed to be growing larger by the hour. Even with the advantage of defensive positions, they couldn't hold out until the ground convoy arrived still. 4 hours away, according to the last transmission from Angel Base. Maya made a decision that felt like stepping off another cliff. "Thompson, I need you to work your way down to the defensive position. Tell Chun I'm going hunting." The young Marine stared at her. "Ma'am, you can't take on an entire Taliban unit by yourself. I'm not planning to fight them." Maya checked her equipment, ensuring she had extra ammunition and her survival radio. "I'm planning to make them think there are more of us than there actually are." It was a page from the Unconventional Warfare Handbook. Use mobility and surprise to create the impression of superior numbers. Make the enemy worry about threats from unexpected directions while wearing down their morale through psychological pressure, the kind of tactics that worked in theory but required perfect execution in practice. Thompson reluctantly began working his way down the ridge toward Chun's position, leaving Maya alone on the high ground with her rifle and a plan that bordered on suicidal. She waited until the young Marine was safely out of the line of fire, then began moving north, along the ridgeline toward the enemy's suspected staging area. The terrain worked in her favor, rocky outcrops and deep shadows that provided concealment while offering multiple firing positions. Maya had learned mountain warfare during her first deployment, understanding how elevation and angles could multiply the effectiveness of a single shooter. One person in the right position could control significant amounts of terrain that she found. Her first target 15 minutes later, a Taliban fighter moving through the rocks with an RPG launcher, probably positioning himself for a shot at Chun's defensive perimeter. Maya settled into a stable firing position, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. The Taliban fighter dropped immediately, his weapon clattering across the rocks as other fighters scrambled for cover. Maya was already moving, using the confusion to relocate to a new firing position 50 meters away. The second shot came from a different angle, targeting a group of fighters who were trying to coordinate their assault via radio. Maya aimed for the man with the antenna, understanding that disrupting enemy communications would create confusion and delay their attack. Another clean hit, another dead enemy fighter, and another cloud of confusion as the survivors tried to figure out where the shots were coming from. Unknown sniper, unknown sniper. The Taliban fighters were using captured American radios, their excited voices broadcasting in broken English. "We have sniper on the high ground." Maya smiled grimly, relocating again to maintain the psychological pressure. The enemy was starting to worry about threats from unexpected directions, exactly as she'd hoped. But she also knew this tactic had limitations. Eventually, they would organize a systematic search of the high ground, and one person couldn't be everywhere at once. Her radio crackled with Chin's voice. "Unknown station. This is Viper 7. Identify yourself." "Chun, it's Maya. I'm on Overwatch, engaging targets of opportunity." "Ma'am, where's Thompson?" "Should be reaching your position any minute now." Maya settled into another firing position, scanning for targets through her night vision scope. "What's your tactical situation?" "Much better since someone started picking off their support personnel." Chun's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. "They've pulled back to regroup, but they'll be coming again soon." Maya found her next target, a Taliban commander who was trying to organize his fighters for another assault. The shot was longer. This time, nearly 300 meters across the valley, requiring compensation for wind and elevation. But the result was the same. Another enemy fighter down, and more confusion among the survivors. "That's some impressive shooting," Chun observed. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Wyoming." Maya was already moving to her next position, knowing that staying in one place too long would allow the enemy to triangulate her position. "My dad taught me to hunt elk in terrain just like this." The psychological effect was starting to show. Through her night vision equipment, Maya could see Taliban fighters moving more cautiously, checking their flanks and rear areas instead of focusing solely on the assault. Fear was a force multiplier that worked both ways. If she could make them worried about snipers in every shadow, their attack would lose coordination and momentum. But ammunition was a finite resource, and Maya was burning through her supply faster than she could sustain. Each shot had to count, targeting high-value personnel who were essential to enemy coordination. She couldn't waste rounds on random fighters. Every bullet had to advance the tactical situation. Her radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. "Viper 7. This is Thunder 1-2. I'm inbound your location with a full load of ordnance." Maya felt a surge of hope. The replacement Apache had finally arrived, armed with Hellfire missiles and 30mm cannon that could tip the tactical balance decisively in their favor. But she also knew that close air support was only effective if the targets could be identified and marked. "Thunder 1-2, Viper 7. I can provide target designation from Overwatch position." "Copy, Viper 7. I need you to mark enemy positions." With IR laser, Maya pulled out her NPEQ-4 laser designator, a piece of equipment that could paint targets with infrared light, invisible to the naked eye but clearly visible to Apache targeting systems. Professional coordination between air, And ground assets, the kind of teamwork that could turn desperate defense into victorious offense. Thunder 1-2, I have multiple enemy positions marked. Request you engage targets from north to south to avoid friendly fire. Copy, engaging targets now. Keep your people's heads down. The Apache's 30mm cannon opened fire with mechanical precision, walking destruction through the Taliban positions that Maya had identified. Secondary explosions bloomed among the rocks as ammunition and equipment detonated under the devastating fire. The psychological effect was immediate. Enemy fighters who had been advancing confidently were now running for cover, but Maya knew the respite was temporary. The Taliban had shown tactical competence and determination, suggesting this was a planned operation rather than an opportunistic attack. They would regroup, adapt their tactics, and return with renewed aggression. The Apache could provide support, but it couldn't stay on station indefinitely. Her radio crackled with a transmission that made her blood run cold. All stations, this is Reaper 1-1. I have multiple vehicles moving through the valley approaches. Count approximately 15 vehicles, mixed technical and transport, reinforcements. The Taliban weren't just regrouping, they were receiving reinforcements that would overwhelm Chun's defensive position through sheer numbers. Maya did the math. 15 vehicles could carry anywhere from 60 to 100 additional fighters, turning a difficult situation into an impossible one. Thunder 1-2, can you engage the vehicle convoy? Negative, Viper 7. They're moving through a civilian area. I need positive identification of hostile intent before I can engage. Maya understood the pilot's position rules of engagement prohibited attacks on vehicles that might contain civilians. But she also understood that those same rules were about to get everyone killed when the vehicles reached the valley and disgorged their cargo of Taliban fighters. She made another decision that would probably end her military career, assuming she lived long enough to have a career to end. Thunder 1-2, I'm going to provide positive identification of hostile intent. Maya worked her way down from the ridgeline with desperate urgency, knowing that the vehicle convoy would reach the valley floor within minutes. The terrain was treacherous in the darkness, loose rock and steep slopes that could easily result in a fatal fall. But speed was more important than safety. Chun's Marines were about to be overwhelmed by superior numbers, unless someone could convince the Apache pilot to engage the approaching vehicles. Her handheld radio crackled with transmissions from multiple sources, Chun coordinating defensive fires, the Apache pilot requesting target updates, and Angel Base demanding status reports that no one had time to provide. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, sliding toward the kind of catastrophic failure that ended with flag-draped coffins and congressional investigations. Viper 7, this is Angel Base. Report your current status immediately. Maya ignored the transmission, focusing on the rocky path that led toward the valley floor. Command wanted reports when they should be providing support. Typical military bureaucracy that prioritized paperwork over people. She had neither time nor patience for explaining tactical decisions to people who weren't sharing the danger. The sound of diesel engines echoed off the canyon walls, growing louder as the Taliban convoy approached the valley entrance. Maya could see headlights in the distance, moving in tactical formation through terrain that offered few opportunities for concealment. Professional soldiers who understood the importance of speed and surprise in mountain warfare. Thunder 1-2, I need you to maintain overwatch on those vehicles. Do not engage until I give the word. Copy, Viper 7. I have them on thermal imaging. 15 vehicles as reported, moving in convoy formation. Maya reached the valley floor and immediately began working her way toward the convoy's projected route. The plan forming in her mind was simple and desperate. Get close enough to identify weapons or hostile intent, then call in the Apache strike before the vehicles could disperse their passengers. A textbook application of forward observer techniques, assuming the textbook covered conducting reconnaissance while outnumbered and unsupported in hostile territory. The first vehicle rounded the bend into the main valley as Maya reached her observation position. Through her night vision scope, she could see it clearly, a Toyota pickup truck with a machine gun mounted in the bed, manned by fighters in military-style gear. Definitely not civilians, definitely hostile intent. Thunder 1-2, I have positive identification of armed technical vehicles. You are cleared hot on the convoy. Are you certain, Viper 7? I need absolute confirmation before engaging. Maya watched the convoy spreading out across the valley floor, disgorging fighters who immediately began moving toward Chun's defensive position. AK-47s, RPGs, and crew-served weapons. Definitely not a humanitarian aid convoy. Confirmed hostile. Weapons free, weapons free. The Apache's Hellfire missiles streaked through the darkness like falling stars, each one guided by laser designation to its intended target. The first vehicle disappeared in a ball of fire and smoke, its fuel tank detonating with secondary explosions that lit up the valley floor. The second missile found its target moments later, turning another technical vehicle into twisted metal and burning fuel, but 15 vehicles were too many targets for 2 missiles. The surviving Taliban fighters scattered across the valley floor, some seeking cover while others continued advancing toward Chun's position. Maya realized with growing desperation that the Apache strike had disrupted the convoy, but not destroyed it. There were still too many enemy fighters converging on their defensive perimeter. Chun, you've got approximately 50 fighters moving toward your position from the west. They'll be in assault range in 5 minutes. Understood. We're as ready as we can be. Chun's voice carried the calm acceptance of a professional soldier who understood that some fights couldn't be won through superior tactics or equipment. Sometimes survival came down to ammunition discipline, steady nerves, and the willingness to sell your life as expensively as possible. Maya began working her way back toward the ridgeline, knowing that her rifle would be more effective from elevated positions. But the Taliban had learned from their earlier encounters. This time, they had scouts watching the high ground, ready to suppress any sniper attempts. The crack of incoming rounds forced her to take cover behind a boulder, chips of rock spraying around her as enemy fighters engaged her position. They had spotted her muzzle flash during the convoy reconnaissance, triangulating her location with professional competence. Now she was the one being hunted. Viper 7, this is Angel Base. Colonel Mitchell wants to speak with you immediately. Maya almost laughed at the timing. Command wanted to have a conversation while she was pinned down by enemy fire, fighting for her life in a situation that existed only because of their reluctance to provide adequate support. The bureaucratic mindset that valued process over results, procedure over people. Angel Base, I'm a little busy right now. Captain Rodriguez, you are in direct violation of multiple orders and have engaged in unauthorized combat operations. You will respond to this transmission immediately. A bullet sparked off the rock beside Maya's head, close enough that she could feel the shock wave. The Taliban fighters were closing in, using fire and movement tactics to advance while maintaining suppressive fire. Professional soldiers who understood that individual marksmanship was less important than coordinated unit action. Angel Base, unless you're calling to provide immediate air support or medical evacuation, I suggest you wait until I'm not being shot at. She turned off the radio, focusing on the tactical situation that was deteriorating by the minute. Through her night vision scope, she could see Taliban fighters moving through the darkness, advancing on both her position and Chun's defensive perimeter. The coordinated assault that would overwhelm them through sheer numbers was finally beginning. Thunder 1-2, I need immediate close air support on my position. Danger close, 30 meters north of my IR strobe. Viper 7, that's too close for cannon fire. I could hit you with fragments. Better than letting them overrun our position. Maya activated her IR strobe, marking her location for the Apache pilot while preparing to move the instant the attack began. I'll displace north on your gun run. The Apache's 30mm cannon opened fire with devastating effect, walking destruction through the Taliban positions that were threatening to overwhelm Maya's location. She used the covering fire to bound between positions, maintaining distance from the advancing enemy while keeping them within effective rifle range, but individual tactics could only accomplish so much against superior numbers. Maya was one person, with limited ammunition, facing an organized enemy force that seemed to have unlimited reinforcements. Eventually, mathematics would overcome marksmanship, and the defensive position would be overrun. Her radio crackled with Chun's voice. Tight with strain. All positions, prepare for final defensive fires. They're coming. Maya looked toward the main defensive position, where muzzle flashes erupted like deadly fireworks as Chun's Marines engaged the Taliban assault. Tracers crisscrossed the darkness while the distinctive sound of AK-47 fire mixed with the sharper crack of American M4 carbines. A firefight that would be decided by ammunition supply and the willingness to die for principle. She made a decision that felt like signing her own death warrant, but which might, if she was very lucky or very skilled by Chun's Marines, the time they needed to survive until the ground convoy arrived. Maya shouldered her rifle and began working her way toward the sound of the guns. Maya moved through the darkness like a ghost, using every piece of cover the rocky terrain provided. The sound of sustained gunfire grew louder with each step, the desperate rhythm of a defensive position under assault. Through her night vision scope, she could see the Taliban fighters advancing in coordinated waves, their muzzle flashes creating a deadly constellation across the valley floor. "Chun, I'm moving to your 6 o'clock position," she transmitted, keeping her voice low to avoid detection. "Don't shoot the crazy pilot coming to join the party." "Maya, stay back." Chun's response was immediate and urgent. "We've got this handled." But Maya could hear the strain in his voice, the telltale signs of a unit that was running low on ammunition and hope. The Taliban had committed everything to this assault, probably every fighter within 50 kilometers. All converging on a handful of Americans who had disrupted their operations once too often. She reached the outer perimeter just as a Taliban fighter appeared from behind a boulder, his AK-47 swinging toward Chun's position. Maya's rifle bucked against her shoulder, the man dropping before he could fire. Clean shot, center mass, the kind of marksmanship that came from growing up hunting in Wyoming mountains. "One down, 49 to go," she muttered, already moving to a new position. The firefight had reached the critical point where individual heroics mattered less than unit cohesion and ammunition discipline. Maya counted muzzle flashes, estimated enemy numbers, and realized with growing certainty that mathematics was working against them. Too many attackers, too few defenders, and not enough bullets to make the equation work. Her radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. "Viper 7. This is Steel Rain 6. We're 5 minutes out from your position." Maya felt her heart skip. Steel Rain was the call sign for the ground convoy armor and infantry that could tip the tactical balance decisively in their favor. But 5 minutes was a lifetime in infantry combat, especially when the enemy was pressing their assault with suicidal determination. "Steel Rain 6, be advised we are heavily engaged. Recommend you approach from the south to avoid crossfire." "Copy, Viper 7. We'll be coming in loud and proud." Maya smiled grimly, recognizing the voice of Lieutenant Colonel James Murphy, a career infantry officer who understood that sometimes the best tactics involved overwhelming firepower applied with surgical precision. Murphy's convoy would include Bradley fighting vehicles, mounted .50 caliber machine guns, and enough infantry to turn defense into offense. But they still had to survive the next 5 minutes. The Taliban assault intensified. as if the enemy commander sensed that time was running short. Maya found herself fighting alongside Marines she'd never met, young men whose names she didn't know, but whose courage she could measure by their steady rifle fire and calm voices under pressure. "RPG," someone shouted, the distinctive whoosh of a rocket-propelled grenade cutting through the gunfire. Maya threw herself behind a boulder as the warhead detonated 20 meters away, showering the position with rock fragments and dust. The explosion was followed immediately by a renewed burst of automatic weapons fire from multiple directions, classic Taliban tactics designed to suppress defenders while assault teams moved to close quarters range. "Thompson Davies, concentrate. Your fire on the left flank." Chun's voice carried the authority of someone who had been in this situation before. "Maya, can you take that machine gun position on the ridge?" Maya looked where Chun was pointing, spotting the muzzle flashes of a PKM machine gun that was raking their defensive perimeter with devastating effect. The position was well chosen, elevated, protected, and offering clear fields of fire across the valley floor. Taking it out would require getting close enough for accurate shooting while under direct observation. "Give me covering fire," she transmitted, already planning her approach route. The movement was conducted in bounds, short rushes between covered positions while Chun's Marines laid down suppressive fire. Maya used every piece of terrain to mask her advance, working closer to the machine gun position with each bound. The Taliban gunner was good, trained in the Soviet tradition of sustained automatic fire, but he was also focused on the main defensive position. Maya reached effective rifle range just as the gunner was changing ammunition belts. She settled into a stable firing position, controlled her breathing, and placed her crosshair center mass on the target. The shot echoed off the canyon walls like thunder, and the machine gun fell silent. "Guns down," she transmitted, already moving to avoid return fire from other positions, but her movement had been observed. Taliban fighters were converging on her position, recognizing that the American sniper was disrupting their assault coordination. Maya found herself cut off from the main defensive position, facing multiple enemies who were determined to eliminate the threat she represented. The firefight became intensely personal, individual marksmanship against superior numbers, with survival depending on ammunition discipline and the ability to think faster than people who were trying to kill her. Maya's rifle became an extension of her will, each shot carefully placed to maximize effect while conserving precious ammunition. "Viper 7, Steel Rain 6 is at the valley entrance. We have your position marked and are moving to assist." The sound of diesel engines and tracked vehicles echoed off the canyon walls, growing louder as Murphy's convoy approached the firefight. Maya could see headlights in the distance, American military vehicles moving with the confidence that came from superior firepower and armor protection. The Taliban commander understood the tactical situation as well as Maya did. The arrival of armored vehicles would end his assault, turning hunters into hunted. His response was immediate and desperate: order all remaining fighters to overrun the American positions before the convoy could intervene. "They're coming from all sides," Chun transmitted, his voice tight with strain. "All positions, prepare for close combat." Maya found herself fighting the kind of battle that helicopter pilots weren't supposed to face: close quarters combat with enemy infantry in terrain that favored neither side. Her M4 carbine felt familiar in her hands, muscle memory from years of training taking over as tactical decisions became automatic. The first Taliban fighter appeared around a boulder, his AK-47 already firing. Maya's response was instinctive, controlled. Pairs to center mass, the man dropping before he could adjust his aim. The second fighter was smarter, using covering fire from his companion while advancing in bounds. Maya adjusted her position, using the rocks for protection while maintaining fields of fire. The firefight lasted exactly 93 seconds. Maya counted automatically, part of her mind tracking time while the rest focused on staying alive. When it ended, 3 Taliban fighters were dead and Maya was down to her last magazine of ammunition. But she was still breathing, still fighting, and still protecting Marines who had trusted her judgment. Viper 7, Steel Rain 6, we have you in visual contact. Keep your heads down while we clean up the neighborhood. The Bradley fighting vehicles opened fire with 25mm cannon, walking destruction through the Taliban positions with mechanical precision. The psychological effect was immediate. Enemy fighters who had been advancing confidently were now running for cover or surrendering. Superior firepower applied with overwhelming force. Maya watched the one-sided battle with professional appreciation. Murphy's convoy had arrived at exactly the right moment, turning desperate defense into victorious offense. The Taliban assault was breaking apart, individual fighters streaming back toward the mountain passes from which they had come. But victory came with a price that couldn't be measured in casualties or ammunition expended. Maya's radio crackled, with a transmission that she had been expecting and dreading in equal measure. "Captain Rodriguez, this is Colonel Mitchell. You are under arrest pending court-martial proceedings. Report to the convoy commander immediately." Maya looked around the battlefield, counting the cost of survival. No American deaths, minimal casualties, and 14 people who would be going home to families who loved them. Against that, she weighed her military career, her reputation, and the certainty that she would face charges that could result in imprisonment. The mathematics were simple. 14 lives against 1 career. Not even close. "Jake," she transmitted on the aviation frequency, knowing her co-pilot would be monitoring from the medical facility where he was recovering. "Tell Miguel's family that he made it home." "Maya, what are you going to do?" Maya shouldered her rifle and began walking toward the convoy vehicles where military police were waiting to take her into custody. "I'm going to face the music, and I'm going to do it with no regrets." The military courtroom at Fort Bragg was sterile and impersonal, designed to emphasize the weight of military justice rather than human emotion. Maya sat at the defendant's table in her dress uniform, watching as character witnesses testified about her service record, her flying ability, and her commitment to bringing people home alive. Miguel Rodriguez had recovered completely, his leg saved by Jake's field medicine and Alex's unauthorized extraction. He testified about the helicopter pilot who had risked everything to save Marines she had never met, whose names she didn't know, but whose lives she valued above her own career. Chun testified about leadership under fire, about tactical decisions that had kept 11 Marines alive in impossible circumstances. Thompson and Davey spoke about courage and initiative, about someone who had led from the front when leadership mattered most. Colonel Mitchell testified about military discipline, about the importance of following orders and maintaining chain of command, about the dangerous precedent set by officers who believed their judgment was superior to established protocol. The verdict was inevitable: guilty of disobeying direct orders, reckless endangerment of personnel, and conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. The sentence was equally predictable: dismissal from service, forfeiture of pay and allowances, and confinement for 18 months. But Maya had expected worse. Judge Advocate General Colonel Sarah Hayes delivered the sentence with the clinical precision of someone who understood that military justice was about maintaining order rather than rewarding heroism. But her final words carried a different message entirely. "Captain Rodriguez, your actions were clearly in violation of military law and established procedure. However, this court also recognizes that 14 American service members returned home alive because of your decisions. The sentence is suspended pending completion of mandatory leadership training and assignment to a non-flying position for the remainder of your enlistment." Maya felt something close to relief. Her flying career was over, but she wasn't going to prison. She would serve out her remaining time behind a desk, processing paperwork and training other pilots who might someday face similar decisions in distant mountains. As the courtroom emptied, Miguel Rodriguez approached her table. He was walking. Without assistance, his recovery complete despite the severity of his wounds. His young face carried the serious expression of someone who had looked death in the eye and lived to tell about it. "Captain, I wanted to thank you." Maya studied his face, seeing echoes of the wounded Marine she had carried out of the Afghan valley. "You don't need to thank me, Rodriguez. I was just doing my job." "No, ma'am. You were doing what was right." His voice carried conviction that came from personal experience. "My little sister graduates high school next month. I'm going to be there because of what you did." Miguel extended his hand, and Maya shook it with the firm grip of one warrior, acknowledging another. They had shared something in that valley that transcended rank and regulation, the understanding that some things were worth fighting for regardless of personal cost. The civilian helicopter touched down on the hospital landing pad with the precision that came from thousands of hours of medical evacuation flights. Maya shut down the engines and began her post-flight checklist, muscle memory guiding her through procedures that had become automatic. "Great flying as always," her paramedic partner said, unloading equipment from the aircraft. That approach through the storm was textbook. Maya smiled, accepting the compliment with the quiet confidence of someone who had found their calling. After leaving the military, she had joined Angel Flight, a civilian organization that provided emergency medical transportation in remote areas. The pay was terrible, the hours were irregular, and the flying was more challenging than anything she had done in the Army. It was exactly where she belonged. Her radio crackled with the familiar voice of the dispatch coordinator. "Angel 7. We have a priority medical evacuation in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Injured hiker, possible spinal injury, location accessible only by helicopter." Maya checked her fuel gauges and weather radar, already planning the approach to mountain terrain in marginal weather conditions. The kind of flying that required every skill she had learned in Afghanistan, applied to saving lives rather than taking them. "Angel 7 is ready for launch." As her helicopter lifted off into the storm clouds, Maya thought about the path that had brought her here, the decisions that had ended one career and begun another, the understanding that some rules were made to be broken when lives hung in the balance. She had learned something important in that Afghan valley. Courage wasn't about following orders or avoiding risk. Courage was about doing what was right when the cost was more than you could afford. To pay. Her radio crackled with updates about the injured hiker, providing medical information and GPS coordinates. Maya adjusted her course toward the mountains, where someone was waiting for help that only she could provide. Some things never changed. 10 years after the events in the Afghan valley, Captain Maya Rodriguez's story became required reading at Army aviation schools, not as an example of how to follow orders, but as a case study in tactical decision-making under pressure. The official title was Leadership in Extreme Circumstances, the Rodriguez Incident. Students studied radio transcripts, tactical maps, and after-action reports, trying to understand how one pilot's decisions had saved 14 lives while ending her military career. The instructors always emphasized the same point: military discipline exists for important reasons, and officers who believe they are above the law create dangerous precedents. But they also noted that combat rarely follows the textbook, and sometimes survival requires thinking outside established doctrine. Miguel Rodriguez became a Marine Corps drill instructor, spending his career training young Marines who might someday face their own impossible choices. He never forgot the helicopter pilot who had risked everything to bring him home alive. Jake Morrison remained in the Army, eventually rising to command his own aviation unit. He named his daughter Maya, though he never told his wife exactly why. Alex Chun was court-martialed for his unauthorized rescue flight, receiving a suspended sentence similar to Maya's. He left the military and joined Angel Flight, where he and Maya occasionally worked together on particularly challenging missions. Sergeant Chun retired from the Marines with full honors, his service record including a commendation for leadership. Under fire in the mountains of Afghanistan. He never mentioned that the tactical decisions credited to him had actually been suggested by a disgraced helicopter pilot. Colonel Mitchell was promoted to general, her career enhanced by her handling of complex disciplinary issues. She occasionally wondered what would have happened if she had trusted Captain Rodriguez's judgment from the beginning. But such thoughts were unproductive. Maya Rodriguez continued flying medical evacuations until she was 55, accumulating over 15,000 hours of flight time in civilian aircraft. She never applied for reinstatement to military service, preferring work that saved lives without requiring her to take them. Her final flight was on a snowy December morning, evacuating a heart attack patient from a remote cabin in Montana. The approach required threading her helicopter through mountain passes in whiteout conditions, the kind of flying that most pilots would have considered impossible. Maya called it Tuesday. She retired to a small ranch in Wyoming, where she taught flying to young pilots who wanted to learn precision techniques from someone who had perfected them in combat. Her students never knew about the court-martial or the 14 Marines she had saved in Afghanistan. They only knew her as the instructor who could land a helicopter anywhere, under any conditions, and who always emphasized the same lesson. Flying was about bringing people home alive, regardless of the personal cost. The ranch had a small memorial garden where Maya honored the friends she had lost in combat, pilots and crew members who hadn't been lucky enough to survive their wars. But it also had a guest book signed by hundreds of people whose lives had been saved by medical evacuation flights. The balance, Maya thought, worked out about right. Thank you for reading Captain Maya Rodriguez, The Final Stand, a story about courage, sacrifice, and the price of doing what's right when the cost seems too high to pay. If you enjoyed this military thriller, please like this story and subscribe to our channel for more gripping tales of heroism, sacrifice, and the men and women who serve in harm's way. What did you think of Maya's decision to disobey orders to save lives? Was she a hero or a reckless officer who endangered her unit? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that notification bell to be alerted when we publish new stories of military courage and aviation adventure. Your support helps us continue bringing you the finest in military fiction.